Shalom, friends. Akiva Gersh here. As a result of this current war against Hamas, the world, many people around the world have once again started throwing out, shouting out that accusation against Israel, that false accusation that Israel is and has been occupying the Gaza Strip. That's simply not true, and I want to spend a few minutes in today's video to explain to you a little bit about the modern history of Israel and the Gaza Strip. We do need to go back a bit over 100 years to right after World War I, when the League of Nations was formed, and they created what was called the mandate system to kind of refigure out things in the Middle East. After the Ottomans lost to the British and the French in the Middle East, there's all this land, and they had to figure out what to do with it. Who's going to get it? What's going to happen to it? They created the mandate system, which was given to the British and the French to oversee the creation of different countries throughout the Middle East. One of these mandates was given to the British, the mandate of Palestine, right? And the responsibility, which is what the word mandate means, the responsibility of the British under this mandate was to oversee, as it was written in the document itself, the creation of a Jewish state in this land. Now, originally, the size of the mandate included what we would call Israel and Jordan today. Jordan was quickly cut off, and the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, what was left. But all that land, according to the text of the League of Nations, mandate for Palestine, all that land was supposed to be the Jewish state that the British were supposed to and put in charge of overseeing the creation of, including the Gaza Strip. Now you look at that document, it's including the Gaza Strip. Okay, now eventually time goes on, years and decades, and there's a very, very big chaos that forms here, specifically because the local Arab population, oftentimes supported by surrounding Arab countries, was fighting against Zionism, fighting against the Jewish right to create a country here, fighting against the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. And eventually, long story short, the British, after World War II, gave up. They said, we can't deal with it anymore. It's too crazy. It's too chaotic. They gave it to the newly formed United Nations, who in 1947 sent a fact-finding mission here, a committee to figure out what should we do with this land. And they came up with the two-state solution. That was 1947. That was not the first time there was a two-state solution. The first one was in 1937, which the Arabs rejected, the Jews had accepted, but that got sent to the garbage can of history, so to speak. 10 years later, the second round of a two-state solution was created, was voted on in the UN, November 29th, 1947, and that would have created two countries here in what was left of mandate, the mandate for Palestine. All right, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Now, the Gaza Strip, as we know it today, was meant to be in the Arab state according to this agreement that was voted upon in the UN. Now, I'll just say this really quickly. Again, there's lots of information here. We're doing this very, very rapidly. But that agreement was non-binding. It was basically, it had the legal weight of a recommendation coming out of the UN. It didn't really matter because the Arabs rejected it. They did not agree to it. And the next day they started war, which is the War of Independence. Okay. And now the war, because the Arabs rejected it and because it was non-binding, because it came up from the General Assembly in the UN and not the Security Council, it basically had no legal weight. And the war would determine the borders. And at the end of the war in 1949, the borders were such that Israel became a bit bigger, and the lands that were supposed to go to the Arab state got a bit smaller. The Gaza Strip along the Mediterranean and what we call Judea and Samaria, some people call the West Bank, right, on the other side of the country. Now, those lands were supposed to be the Arab state, but it never happened. Why? Because Egypt grabbed the Gaza Strip for itself illegally, and Jordan grabbed Judea and Samaria illegally for itself, calling it the West Bank. That's where the name comes from. They called it the West Bank, right? The West Bank of the Jordan River. Anyway, that's how things were from 1949 to 1967 until Israel was basically attacked by three countries simultaneously, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. We defended ourselves greatly, and we defeated all of these countries, and we took land from these three countries, including the Gaza Strip from Egypt. Now remember, Egypt was occupying the Gaza Strip illegally. And remember, the only legal document on the books ever, including up until today, that said what should be done with the Gaza Strip is the mandate for Palestine by the League of Nations after World War I, which basically said it should be included in the Jewish state that was being created here. Anyway, we take over the Gaza Strip in 1967, first militarily, and eventually civilians are allowed to come in and build settlements. And eventually there's a couple dozen settlements that are built there, up to about 10,000, a little less, Israeli civilians will live there. And that will happen all the way up until 2005, after the second Intifada, which was 4 years, 5 years of very, very intense strings of terror attacks, lots of suicide bombings, over 1,000 Israelis murdered during those times. The Israeli government, led by Ariel Sharon, decided, not everyone in the government, some in the government said, we are going to leave Gaza unilaterally. We're going to give it to the Palestinian leadership as with the hope that they're going to use it for peaceful purposes. That's not what happened. We did leave in 2005. All soldiers, all civilians, all settlements were evacuated, with the hopes that peace would come. That obviously didn't. The next year there were Palestinian elections. Hamas won. The next year after that there was a civil war between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. Hamas won that also. And ever since then, ever since 2007, they have been in control of the Gaza Strip, using it as a launching pad of terrorism and war against Israel. And immediately, as soon as they took over control in 2007, Israel, along with Egypt, put a siege around the Gaza Strip, land, air, and sea, meaning nothing could go in or out without first going through us, right? So it's not that there's an occupation. We haven't been inside occupying. There's no military bases inside before this war, or civilian settlements, civilian communities. We left in 2005 hoping that they would use this as a chance to better their lives, better themselves, and create peace between themselves and Israel. That's not what they did. Instead, unfortunately, they voted in Hamas. Hamas took over and again has been using it as a launching pad of terrorism ever since, in very, very violent and intense and barbaric ways, as we saw on October 7th. But it's very important that you know, and that we know, that people know, that Israel left in 2005 and we haven't had a presence there. So to say that Israel has been occupying the Gaza Strip since is simply not true.